Hey, welcome back to another Bitcoin Reformation podcast. I'm Ben Haupt, joined by my good friends Jared Townley and David Ruffner, three Lutheran pastors talking about Bitcoin and the gospel. We're excited to talk today about this title, Don't Trust, Verify. But first, let's do a quick check-in with each other just to see how we're doing.
So, hey, I can share my part sort of here, what's going on in Cabot, PA. So, here we just had a great weekend, Labor Day weekend, just a couple of weeks now ago, probably by the time this is out. And in Western PA is a theme park called Idlewild. And it's like a little kids park. There's a small water park there too. But it's really good for kids who are what I would say are Daniel Tiger age. And so my daughter is in that age range right now, and so it's perfect for her. And we went with my brother and sister-in-law. It was their gift to our kids for their birthdays. And we were there and went down. Zoe went on her first big girl ride, if you will, on like a log, one of those log rides. And so you get in the little log boat, right? You go around and then you just go basically up a big ramp and then down into the water, make a big splash. And so she is three years old, right? And she's like, I want to go on that. And I was like, all right, girl, like your dad is a little nervous to go on this ride, but sure, we can do it. I'm brave. Right, right. And so she sat in my lap, and I had my 360 camera that I record some stuff with, and she loved it. Like she we were going, I told her, hey, when we get there, like put your hands up to go down the hill. And so a quarter of the way into the ride, she goes, I'll put my hands up. And then she rode around the ride with her hands up the entire time. And then as we went over the crest to go down, you watch in the video and her hands just go like this onto my lap as we like go down into the water. And she on the video makes no face really, pretty straight faced. But then as soon as we're kind of down into the water, she immediately starts cackling, like laughing with pure joy and delight, and says, "Can we do it again?" I'm like, "Girl, I don't know whose child you are, but that is not from your dad." He is not that kind of adrenaline junkie thing, but nevertheless, still like super fun to sort of see that level of joy and happiness in her. And that she's not asking to go on roller coasters yet is really nice because she's too short and I can't do that. So, a great moment of summer fun as fall begins to make its way here to Western PA. So, looks like we might have lost David,
That's
but
awesome.
what's going on in your world, Ben?
Yeah, I texted him and I think he's okay. But internet or Wi-Fi, he said, is going in and out. So we'll keep you up to speed if we hear from David. I will say David is an incredible outdoorsman, much like you are, Jared. And I was going to say, as you were talking about roller coasters, that your level of adrenaline rush is hiking the Appalachian Trail. So that's a different kind of
Right.
adrenaline, a slower, longer kind of adrenaline. But David also is an incredible outdoorsman, and so uh, also very much a preparer. And so I trust that he's going to be just fine. He doesn't live in Big Bear without understanding the challenges and even the dangers of being up there. So no, things are good in my world. I'm settling into my new role with PLI. Got to talk to a good friend today over in Germany, and really just starting to have conversations with friends around America and even some around the globe. Had a doctor's appointment today for a shoulder. I have bicep tendonitis. So evidently, I am lifting too much weights. I think it's probably not so much the amount of weight, but the age of my muscles. And so, yeah, some ibuprofen will get me through, the doc said. Um, Other than that, family's fine. We're enjoying our oldest son's senior year of high school and really getting into uh, college visits and exploring different colleges. And so that's an exciting process. But I'm excited for our topic today. I'm sad that David won't be here because he had some really great things to share, and maybe Jared and I can to try to bring a little bit of that across. But this whole concept, which is a phrase that a lot of Bitcoiners use, don't trust, verify. Jared, do you want to just kind of unpack that in the briefest way possible? What do Bitcoiners basically mean when they say don't trust, verify? And then we'll get into kind of the some of the deeper implications and thinking behind that, and maybe even then make some connections to our Lutheran heritage, Reformation kinds of stuff. But what do Bitcoiners mean when they say don't trust, verify?
So when Bitcoiners say that, I think maybe an example is probably the best way to do that. So let's imagine that I want to go and rent or going to buy a new car, right? And I want to take a new car for a spin. What do they usually do? They take your license and photocopy it so that if you steal this car, they know exactly who you are, right? And so they're not going to just trust you. Oh, hey, I'm a good person. Let me take this car for a spin. They're going to verify who you are so that then if you do something wrong, that they can, find you, get you, all those sort of things. And so at its core, Bitcoiners, and we've talked briefly about this too, is they're trying to remove as much trust as is possible, so that then you can instead not trust but actually prove, usually with some sort of key phrase or some sort of something else in the Bitcoin world, that what this person is doing or saying is actually true. And so it is and we'll talk about this, it's a less to zero faith sort of thing, and a full lean into the idea of facts and proof and evidence.
Yeah, and that's really important. I think that's well put. Thinking about a car lot, they're not going to trust a stranger, right? That comes in and says, "Hey, I want to test drive a car." They're not just like, "Hey, here's the keys. Have fun."
Right.
Oh no! I mean, we all know that we live in too big of a society for I suppose if you lived in a small town, let's say you live in a small town of 100 folks, and somebody has a car lot there, you'll probably, I'm almost certainly, Joe or Sam or Bill or Bob, the used car salesman, and you come down and you say, "Hey, Bob, can I test drive this car?" And he probably does throw you the keys, right? Um, the problem, I've been listening to this book called the Genesis book by Aaron Van Weerdum, and I think that's how you pronounce it, or Van Werdum. He's been talking about Nick Szabo, who was one of the kind of minds behind Bitcoin, and part of the problem that Nick Szabo in this early book on decentralized cryptocurrencies that he got into was the Dunbar number. The Dunbar number, if you don't recall that, Malcolm Gladwell also talked about it a little bit in I think Blink maybe. It's this, or maybe it was the tipping point. The number 150. Once you get beyond 150 people, you can't know all of them personally. I knew this as a small church pastor. Um, I could know the congregation of 150 people in church very easily, and all of them knew everybody else, knew each other, right? But once you get to a congregation that's much bigger than 150 people in church on a weekend, not everybody can know everybody. That's kind of how the Dunbar number works. And so I think that's kind of how trust works, right? At a big car lot, if you live in a city of a couple million people, they don't know you from anybody else. They don't know whether you're a thief or not. And so it makes just good stewardship, good sense to not trust a stranger, but rather to verify.
I think another good
So,
example of this is, if you are a adult who wants to come into our school, you have to take a background check, right? there might have been a day in which we were okay to allow adults to come into school without any sort of verification that they were not someone who's going to cause harm to our children. But based off of what has happened, we are now, it's pretty common agreement, right? That we must do background checks as people come into it. So even if it's and this is where it's kind of the painful part of it, right? That, hey, we know, the Grandma Schmidt, right? She's a nice lady. Well, Grandma Schmidt still has to be verified to be a nice lady. That we don't just trust her as she says that she is nice, as we even might know her, that we have to sort of prove that she is who she says she is, that there's not something that we don't know about her. And I think for me, when I hear about that, when I think about that, the sort of the sort of sadness that there is to that, right? That I think most people would like this idea of that small church that you talk about, Ben. Like, I'm known by everyone, everyone knows me, and yes, no one is perfect, but that it's a one. There's one thing to feel known, and there's one thing to feel like you belong to a community where there is trust in, right? I mean, we've all been in, whether it's personal relationships or work relationships, where there's no trust, and just how difficult it is to manage those, how difficult it is to live into those things. And so as I think about it too, there's a sort of grief that it is this way. And right, as pastors, we would say that word is sin, right? That's the problem, that's the difficulty of why we can't necessarily trust, and that we have to do these things like verify that you're not someone that you don't aren't willing to tell us, or verify that you're not a thief like at a car lot. It all kind of comes back to this core fact that I'm a person that who selfishly looks out for me and myself and I and my family, and that's going to mean that maybe I don't do things in the way that I should, and that all of us are in that way too.
Yeah, and by the way, I think we should say just up front, because I did get I had a nice exchange with one of our listeners. I think he saw one of our shorts and had some questions about some things I said, and I think, and I just invited him to continue to listen to the episodes, continue to search the scriptures with us. That my prayer is that Jesus leads us into all truth. Uh, but just to make some distinctions, because that's what especially Lutheran theologians and Lutheran pastors are trained to do, is to try to distinguish things and to be clear about what we're talking about. We're not talking about the vertical relationship with God. Our relationship with God is very much based on trust. In fact, that is like the core central tenet of especially a Lutheran understanding of Christianity, is that our relationship with God is not based on works, it's based on trust. Um, and so we do trust God. And yet, David was going to kind of point out that even the central claim of our faith, that Jesus Christ died and rose, is actually can be subjected to verification. Don't just trust what Jesus said. Don't just trust what Jesus said about God. Verify that he actually lived the way he lived, died the way he died, and rose the way he rose. So I think that is kind of an interesting spin on that. Any thoughts on this kind of initial vertical versus horizontal relationship kind of thing, Jared?
I feel like we could do like half an episode on each of those, right? But it's funny you say it that way. Like I was coming at this kind of in the opposite, that in some ways we cannot verify, right? Be, the sort of skeptic claim would say, well, how do you know Jesus is not dead? Well, his bones haven't been found. Well, great. That doesn't that sound just so convenient? This guy's alive because we can't find his bones. Okay. Uh, but then at the same time, there you could say, oh, well, you need to trust the eyewitness accounts of the resurrection, right? And I think Case for Christ is probably a book that some people might have heard for, that he tries to go through and like make the claim that this is all verifiable stuff. And even and this is maybe a side hobby horse for me, in the world we live in, we, I would say, strongly bow down to the altar of reason, logic, and proof of evidence, sort of thing. That if you can say, if how many times have you watched the news or read something online, according to a new study, right? Like if there is some sort of proof and evidence behind it, then you can pretty much say whatever you want, because that is sort of the chief thing. And sometimes, even as Christians, before we talk about Bitcoiners, that we like to live, even in our relationship with God, that we like to say, well, there's proof of this, there's evidence of that, and this is I can prove to you that. And my response to people all the time is, that's great, you can, we should talk about how to talk about Jesus, how to defend the faith, but at the end of the day, faith is faith, right? Like it means trusting in what you can't see, and believing that what might not be visible in front of you actually is. And so as we talk about don't trust, verify, it's funny, like David, they're both true, right? That there is, it's why we say the creed, the apostolic faith. That means the faith that the apostles passed down to us, right? That we're not just making this up new here, but that this is a thousands of year old sort of thing that we're doing. But at the same time, we can't say prove that it's as real in the same way that I'm real, or over the screen, or if you were to be here where I am to touch me, like it's just not there. And so at least when we're talking about this way, I want to live in both worlds. That do I believe that it's verifiably true because of what is written in the scriptures and what the creeds say? Absolutely. But do I also believe that there's no way that I can prove to you in the same way in which you probably desire me to prove to you? Because then you're just knowing information. You're not having faith in Jesus. And those are two things that are, they're very kind of mutually exclusive of each other. But like you said, we as Lutheran people like to live into distinctions. And that's exactly what we do, even though they seem completely opposed to each other all at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the thing that comes to mind for me is on the verify side is our creed includes, for example, the name Pontius Pilate. So as you read the Gospels are very interested in, especially Luke, basing this in a particular reign while these kind of events were happening, talking very much about like eyewitnesses. And Paul even says, like, hey, Jesus Christ rose from the dead, appeared to 500 witnesses in 1 Corinthians 15. He's talking about this, and he says, some of them are still alive. In other words, if you don't believe me, go ask them. So on, I think what David's perspective was, or his idea, not kind of in a totally modernist sort of way, but that the central claims of Christ's life, death, and resurrection are actual events that happened and that people witnessed. It's not like Buddhism or something where it's just a kind of a philosophy or a way of life. Stuff happened, events happened, took place, much like in the Old Testament, the Israelites actually walked across the Red Sea and escaped from slavery from the Egyptians. Now, people will debate about that all the time, but that's kind of the idea, is that events actually happened. And yet, on the other hand, what came to mind is our Luther's explanation of the third article of the Apostles' Creed, where he specifically says, I believe that I cannot by my own reason or senses believe in Jesus Christ, my Lord, or come to him. And so Luther, who very much believed that Jesus physically died, lived, died, and rose, yet also he will teach that human beings can't just by reason alone. It's the kind of, do you believe this? Even the demons know this and shudder. And so Luther wanted to make sure that we did trust in God and not just relied on our own reason and our own verification of the facts. So I guess for Christians, it's trust and verify.
or both, right?
But the reason for that is the because God is trustworthy, um, and so now we're to the horizontal plane where we start thinking about our fellow human beings, and that's where we're not trying to sow seeds of dissension in society or say that we should have all out anarchy, um, but to say that human beings are, every single one of them, sinful. And so every human institution, uh, even Christians that would gather into a church and call themselves a church body, um, those can be, and oftentimes very much are, tainted by sin.
Right. And I mean, you you look at all the sort of, I don't know, call it church scandals of the 21st century, and the sort of cover up stuff that's happened, and a lot of those are sort of we'll use the word like centralized problem, if you will, right? That in the
Unpack that a little bit, because I think the word centralized, Bitcoiners know a
right,
lot about it, talk a lot about it, but what do you mean by that? I'm fully tracking,
right,
but unpack that a bit.
and I'd be, I'll throw it back to you to sort of fill in where I miss out. But when I think about centralized, I think a good example of something that is centralized is the Apple ecosystem. And so the Apple ecosystem, once you get in, it's rather difficult to leave. But once you're in, they have all of your stuff everywhere, right? And so it's so easy to get a new iPad to transfer from your old one that then syncs with your computer, with your phone, with your watch, with your, all those sort of things, because it's a centralized thing that there is one person or entity that holds all of the information, all of the power, and all of the sort of ability to make change too. That's where I would go.
They
Any
essentially hold it. They essentially hold it in a secret place, so it's not like you can, where do all my apps and all of my calendar information? Where can I like go to grab a hold of it? there's there's no, show up at Tim Cook's house. No, there's no place that I can access that. It's held in a secret place, and they essentially have total access to the information. And sometimes they hide information when it fits their purposes,
I
right?
think a good sort of litmus test, if you're in a centralized place, did you have to click yes to terms and conditions? Because if you clicked yes to those, that's showing someone else has the power, someone else has the authority, someone else is in control. And when you say yes, this is going to sound kind of extreme, but you're submitting to their authority when you use their platform, right? And so, I mean, you can think of a whole bunch of things. Facebook is a centralized place. MySpace of days gone by was centralized. Google is a sort of centralized place. It's all of these sort of big names, right? That we agree to use the stuff that they put out, but we agree to it on their terms, and we give them our data, our information. And then in a lot of ways, we surrender our own right to those very things because of the centralization and the nature of it. And so when we think about the sort of problems, right, talking about the church history problems, a lot of it is the centralized nature, because what are they trying to do? Well, in today's day and age, especially, reputation is everything, right? And so think about your favorite restaurants you go to. Well, what am I going to go to when I'm going to a new city? I want to go to the 5-star Yelp places. I want to go to Google 5 stars. I want to go get my car fixed at the 5-star place, not at the 3-star sketchy looking review. These people were bad to me. And so, I mean, obviously, I'm thinking about Catholic Church here, but there are many other examples too. What is done in those centralized opportunity, those moments, is to protect the centralization of the organization, right? And so we can say clearly those are bad decisions, right? But if you look at it from the lens of what they're trying to do, it in some ways makes sense. Not making any excuses for them at all. But what they're trying to do is to save the authority, save the power, save the centralized nature of what that organization is. And so when we think about that in the Bitcoin world, When we say we don't want to trust, what we're saying is we want less centralization. That there is a sense in which, even let's transition, talk about money. There is a sense in which the banking system in our world is super centralized, right? That we could start at the Federal Reserve and work our way all the way down to our own bank accounts, but that all of this stuff requires massive amounts of trust. And we talked about how we have to trust that the Federal Reserve isn't going to debase the currency so that then my dollars are worth less in my bank account. We have to trust that the bank that says those digital numbers on my screen are actually what is mine, even though we've talked about too how those are not necessarily there in that same way. We have to trust that if I want to go get some money, that I can actually get it. There is just layer upon layer upon layer upon layer of trust. And so when we start this phrase, what we say, don't trust, is what we're saying is, hey, there's a lot of trust built in the system, and we don't like that. And we think it should be differently.
Yeah, this I go back again to the Genesis book by Aaron Van Weerdum and talking about Nick Szabo, and he was studying. This was a guy that was very instrumental in some of the big ideas that developed into Bitcoin, and he was interested in the late '90s in how money came to be, and he he talked about. So think of tribes of Native Americans. They're trading amongst themselves. They're probably small enough, many of the tribes small enough, at least in some places, where the local tribe, the local gathering of that tribe, knew each other, and so they could trade. Um, if some people went out and got a deer, they could trade that for with other people who got a buffalo or whatever. But Zabo noticed in the history of the tribes that jewelry became important. And the reason why was because jewelry was seen as this thing that, I mean, you can't eat it, you can't survive off of it. And yet, because there were tribes that were beginning to trade with one another, the the piece of jewelry became a symbol of value that could be traded for from one tribe to another, where they didn't necessarily trust one another, but this bigger symbolic value would then allow them to, if one group of one tribe was living, say, on the coast and they were big into fishing, and another tribe was living more inland and they had deer and buffalo, they could, if it wasn't high fishing season, the coastal people could trade their jewelry for some deer or buffalo. And I think that's the kind of thing that helps us start to realize what money is. It's a way to exchange value in a society where we don't all know each other and trust each other. Our society in America is way too big. Frankly, even just in our local cities, or even at my little municipality. I mean, I'm still new to the neighborhood. I don't even know my next door neighbors yet. Still working on that. And that's something to work on for sure. I am going to work on it. But we just live in a society in which I don't trust every single American. So we have this thing called the dollar, which helps us to trade services from a mechanic to a grocer to a doctor. Um, and that's why money is so important. But there comes a problem. Nick Szabo recognized this problem of what he called the trusted third party. So, Jared, you and I know each other, but if I found a person that I didn't know and I wanted to trade some of my value for some of that person's services, um, we need a trusted third party to to make that trade go well. But what's the problem with trusted third parties?
Well, it's that they can't always be trusted, right? I mean, that's the simple answer. But the sort of, I would use the analogy if you're adding another sort of plate on or a thing on your hands or a plate to sort of balance too. And that just like you all have your own interest when you come to stuff like that, so does that third party, right? And so whether it would be some sort of fee or some sort of self interest to maybe take a little bit more than what is or could be theirs, that a trusted third party introduces more centralization, usually, and then more sort of risks to for them to not be truthful, not do exactly what they're supposed to.
Yeah, so there was actually a problem in in societies, and this goes back. I read a really interesting paper during Luther's time. This was actually a problem, and if you watch the show The Medici's, you kind of see this where these bankers who are running this trusted third party system of monetary exchange, some of the rulers were actually taking like uh, bronze or whatever kind of metal was being used to make a coin, and they were shaving off little pieces of it because then you could take all those little pieces, melt it down, and make your own,
Right.
right? Um, so if they start to skimp a little bit on the amount of silver or bronze or copper or whatever that's going into the coinage, then they can keep a little bit back for themselves. And what happens is that coin, the newer coin, is not really worth as much as the old coin because there's not as much precious metal in there. And so rulers realized that they could essentially game the system by giving people, the common people, what they thought was, a dollar coin, and yet it's only got 90% of the metal in it. So they were able to then make more coins and essentially game the system. And so, yeah, centralized third parties can't be trusted. At least that's the history of how um, money has the history of money has perceived that people can't be trusted with these systems.
Before we make a turn to sort of how does Bitcoin help with this, I think another good example that people would relate to is the way in which social media controls information, right? And so in today's day and age, most a lot of people get information. If it's not cable news, then it's probably some sort of social media. And because that is also a centralized thing, that centralized company does control who gets to say what and what is acceptable, what is permissible to be taken down. And we don't need to go super far down this rabbit hole, but I mean, there's been recent things in the news about people either admitting that they allowed certain individuals to pressure them into taking certain things down. Certain countries have now, disavowed these different social media companies to allow to operate in their jurisdictions, and all of that stuff is because someone else, again, has the power, has the ability to say, well, you can't say that or you can't do that. And even, I mean, even on YouTube, like that happens too. In the Bitcoin world, it seems like every month or so, someone's Bitcoin channel gets taken down for whatever reason, and sometimes it gets put back up. But just that idea that you are not in control and someone else has the power, the authority, and they are requiring or forcing you to trust them because you're using their sort of system. And so when we come back to the dollar, right, we can think about how the centralization is there, but we can also think about sort of the trust aspect, like Ben's talking about, with the way in which it's not they're not skimping little corners off of our dollar bill, right? They're producing more of them, and so we can't trust them, or we don't have to, I guess, maybe is better, the better way to start that conversation. So, Ben, where would you go from, hey, if this is all the things that we can't trust or why centralization is bad, where do you think we should go next?
Well, I think I just want to say, I mean, this, as I'm listening to our conversation, I could see somebody saying, well, is it possible to live in the world and not trust people? Because you could multiply this example of centralization out to almost everything, right? And there are religious societies that have essentially said we really don't trust centralized governments. So the Amish, for example, say we're going to not participate in the electrical grid because, well, they have all kinds of reasons why, but um, they essentially withdraw themselves because they don't trust the government. And I would say I'm not necessarily encouraging people to all go out and live in the woods off the grid and never use anything that anybody else that they don't know has ever made. That's not the point. The point is, I think, that money, that's the place where it's really important to know if you're trusting a trusted third party, what the problems are with a monetary system that is using essentially a government to run the monetary system. History would say, Neil Ferguson's book, The Ascent of Money, he just has gobs and gobs and gobs of examples of rulers over the years that owned the monetary system and they inflated it. They, were shaving off or punching out little parts of coins, and making the same coin worth less and less and less. And we're seeing that in America. We've talked about that several times, the problem of inflation. So I think trying to bring the scope in, the examples are good, but what we really want to talk about is is money and the problem with needing to trust a third party for the value of our money. We are, as people who are Lutheran pastors, we participate in the monetary system. We're not anti-money. The love of money is the root of all evil, but the use of money is not. Jesus was not opposed to using the Roman monetary system, right? He said, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's," and that kind of meant maybe you give the shekel that has the Roman emperor's image on it to Rome to pay your taxes, or maybe you give that Roman shekel that has the Roman emperor's image on it to God because God owns the Roman emperor, right? So it was kind of it was a genius answer to that question. So I just wanted to focus us in a little bit specifically on the problem of money and trusted third parties.
Yeah, I think that's wise. We could talk all day about sort of centralized and decentralized other things too. Um, when I think about money and the sort of trusted third party, another good example for me then comes to, let's go first to Canadian truckers. So I'm not, this is not a political statement. I'm not here to support or dissupport them, whatever, just a what is. And that, they were doing their sort of blocking the roads, and Justin Trudeau freezes their bank accounts, right? And money that was sent to them, even if you sent money to the GoFundMe, your bank accounts were frozen. And so you're trusting a third party that then can cut off your ability to live, right? I mean, in today's day and age, you need money not to buy nice things, but to get food, to have water, to have electricity. And so suddenly, because of something that they believed, they could no longer function and live in society because they had trusted someone else. Another good example, foreign countries, right? So again, not a political statement, not an endorsement, or not the other way, but when Russia invaded Ukraine, we as the United States froze their foreign reserves of the currency. So they hold money with the United States government, and we basically said, "Oh, yes, that. Nope, you can't use that. You can't spend that. You can't do that anymore." And so they were trusting us with that stuff, and we, I would go so far as to maybe say, abused our privilege of that, and said, "Sorry, we're going to take this as a form of sanction against you as a nation." And so when you think about don't trust someone as a third party when it comes to money, one of those reasons is because if you're not in the in and you're trusting someone else, they can do whatever they want with your money. I'm not going to play the fear person here, but there's some people that are listening to this that I'm sure would say, well, that's a good idea. That, hey, if there truly is this Christian doomsday coming in the future, that maybe it would be wise for churches to have some money that the government couldn't control. That maybe it would be wise for Christians to have something that if the government said, hey, unless you're willing to do these sort of things, then you won't have access to the financial rails. Then what are we going to do? Because we need money to do ministry, right? We need money to share the gospel with people. And so one of the first things that Bitcoin does in the sort of don't trust is it gives people the ability to control funds, to send funds, to not have that trusted third party to steward their sort of savings, their time of value, like you said, Ben. And that is a very powerful thing, but something that a lot of Western people don't quite grasp the importance of, but it's super, super foundational, super important when we think about, hey, what does it first mean to not have to trust someone with my money, with my funds? Why does that actually matter? Why is it important? Well, because some people, the government takes their money or seizes it or freezes it, and then they are just stuck and they can't do anything else with it. When you think about that, Ben, what else comes to mind for you when you think about why don't trust when it comes to Bitcoin?
I, I, I want to say first that I think that's really helpful. I hear a lot of Bitcoiners talking about the problem of inflation, and you're highlighting a different problem, right? So one problem is how much is your money worth? Well, how much can your dollar buy? We've talked about that in a previous episode, um, the purchasing power problem, but there's another problem, and it's this access, right? So here's what comes to my mind as I think about access, and lots of people around the world experience this regularly. They're part of the problem with access is just not having the infrastructure in order for people in countries that have had dictatorships and have been kind of anti-Western governments. They just don't have access to things like the United States dollar system. And so you have this. I mean, I've been in Haiti where the Haitian money is worth nothing, and they just take the U.S. dollar, and it's like a treasure because it's so stable, right? So inflation is one. Not having access to just a stable kind of monetary system is another. And yet then in I think more developed economies and more developed societies, you have this problem where, and we see this more and more and more in the West, is the extremes, right? So you have, and I think there are a lot of people talking about this in this upcoming election. A lot of people, at least as I listen to people, are afraid of one or other or both candidates being more extreme than what we've seen in the past. So I want to introduce into the conversation my friend Friedrich Hayek. The Road to Serfdom. Um, Friedrich Hayek wrote this book right after, well, actually, I think he started it under the Nazi regime when Hitler was coming to power. And he was thinking back first to the problems of a centralized economy under the Weimar Republic before Hitler, which had very classically inflated their money to the point where it was worth nothing. Um, and then Hitler comes in, and he wants to be this kind of conservative power, and austerity is that's kind of the name of the game for Hitler. Um, but he especially then starts to cut people out of the economic system. So you have the Kristallnacht, where all the Jews' homes are raided, and you very quickly get all these different uh, laws that Hitler imposes, where if you have this view, if you speak out against the Führer, the Chancellor, if you speak out against Hitler, you'll be cut off, and he can just eliminate your bank account and steal everything that you have. And so Hayek was super allergic to any kind of government where they would have control over the entire monetary system. And so he talks a lot about the problems of what he calls centralized planning. And any power that's in control, that has control over the money, is going to become just an utter disaster for humanity. Um, I don't know. You've been listening to Friedrich Hayek as well, so I think you had some quotes that you had come across that would be
It's a
helpful.
really tough listen. I'll say it that way. There are some books that are really easy to listen to, and I'll listen to those sometimes when I'm running. But this is one where it's like, if I'm not actually listening, I'm lost real quick. But
Yeah.
nevertheless, I don't have a direct quote, so maybe I'd lean on you for that. But I took some notes as I was listening about sort of what chapters were about, and so I made a note about the fourth chapter that said the fourth chapter makes points about the connection between decentralization and the industrial progress. It also talks about the need for decentralization because no one can consider all the necessary implications when setting price. So let's unpack that a little bit. Uh, what we're talking about, don't trust, verify. Part of that is the idea too that we can't know. We're trusting, the Federal Reserve, 8 people in a room, 10, however many people it is, for them to set the monetary policy for the world, basically, because of the dollar. And so what he's saying, again, not in our context, but so many years before, is that it is impossible to set the price for money for anything because you can't fully realize all the implications. This is the sort of ripple effects, right? That if I throw a rock into the lake, right, it's going to ripple all over. But if I maybe, take a right turn, what does it mean that I didn't go left? That sort of thing. That it's truly impossible for every person to fully realize the implications of what they're doing. And so when you think about centralized planning, I mean, this will probably come out sometime after it's happened, I would assume. The Federal Reserve, my wife even said it. We talked about this a couple of episodes ago. The Federal Reserve is going to cut interest rates. And they're doing that because they're doing it in response to inflation, to the employment numbers, trying to keep their mandates as their centralized organization. And so they're doing it thinking that this is going to be the outcome, right? That this is the implication we want to happen in the economy. But what Hayek is saying is that's great. You can think that, but there's no way you can fully realize or understand every single implication of what you just did. And for that reason, it is much better to live in a decentralized world in a decentralized way, because then those changes aren't up to someone else. Instead, they're, at least in the Bitcoin world, we're living into the rule of code or the program language of Bitcoin, the sort of 21 million, the halving stuff, all that we talked about before, and that there's no change in that. And so, in a sense, there's no change in implications of what the changes are being made because there are no changes that are being made. And so what is today is what will be in 10 years, in 20, in 100 years, even, because it's how it is. And there's no one who is planning it, there's no one who is changing it.
Yeah, and this really comes to this term free market. Um, where Hayek believed that nobody can control the price of a good, or they can try, but it's going to really be devastating for individuals. And so, as much as communist China tries to control prices, communists are very well known for being controllers of all kinds of things, right? I spent some time in summer of 1998. I lived with this family in former Eastern Germany, and I talked to them. This was in Lutherstadt Wittenberg, in Luther city of
Sure.
Wittenberg.
Wow.
I lived, and I remember talking to the dad who had spent. I mean, he's probably like my age now, 45. I was like 19 or 20, um, and he had lived most of his life under the communist regime in East Germany, and he would tell these stories about how each week, they'd go to the grocery store, and you'd say, "Here's how many family members I have," and they would just give you the bag of food that a family of five gets.
Wow.
And if you say, like, "Well, I don't like this," like, that,
Don't care.
you know, don't care, like, next, right? Kind of like the soup
No soup for
Nazi
you.
on no soup for you. He told me that every Christmas they would go and stand in an hours long line to get one orange per child, and they would bring home one orange per child, uh, as a Christmas present from the government.
Wow.
Man, I don't want to live in that kind of a society. And he was very, very, very happy to not live in that kind of a society anymore. Um, that's an extreme form, but I think the point would be that um, it's not good for individuals when any centralized group is trying to control prices, how much the dollar is worth, so inflation and how many dollars are printed. That whole idea just doesn't work. And why? Because society is just too complex. There's another great quote um, that Hayek has on page 234 of the definitive edition. This is the prospects of international order. So let's see what chapter this is. Chapter 15. He says, "We shall not rebuild civilization on the large scale." This is him writing now after the fall of the Third Reich. "It is no accident that on the whole there was more beauty and decency to be found in the life of the small peoples, and, and that among the large ones there was more happiness and content in proportion as they had avoided the deadly blight of centralization." So uh, I wrote next to there, like, Hayek wants to live in Hobbiton, right, the Shire,
Right.
where you can imagine the Shire, where like everybody's in the movie, everybody's kind of like happy and trading. You got the one gruff person, right, but everybody knows them, and yeah, and that's fine. But if we have to live in a big society, let us live in a big society in which there's no big centralized authority or controlling power. That's when, as Lord Acton once said, power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's the kind of idea that Hayek has, especially when it comes to the monetary system.
And I don't know if we want to go here now, but the other thing when I think about as far as why does this matter, why does we don't trust, is in the sort of if Ben wants to send me something, he needs to prove that he has it, sort of thing too. And so it's slightly related. There's no third party that's going to verify it, right? That Ben can't cozy up to and say, "Hey, can you say that I actually have 20 when I really only have 10?" There's that aspect, but it's just a core to sort of how it works. So how Bitcoin works. So we've talked briefly on here about uh, key phrases, right? We use the analogy of our house key, our private key, our public key, and all those things are linked to our wallet. So we've used that phrase too. That anyone with that string of numbers and letters can verify that I have this much amount, right? And so if I want to send Ben, let's use a fun number. Let's say I have 100 Bitcoin I want to send to Ben. I'm feeling really generous today. And so I want to send him 100 Bitcoin. Well, if I want to send him that, I'm going to have to verify with the Bitcoin network, right, that I actually have that to send to him, that I can. Because if I try and send something that I don't, that's where this decentralized network of Bitcoin comes in. The nodes and the miners will not make that transaction. They won't. It will not go through. They will not do it because it's not going to fall within the rules of the network. That I must only send what I have. And so another part of this, just maybe as equally important, not, I mean, I don't know. I don't know too many people who are necessarily struggling with, well, someone said they were going to send me $1,000,000 and then they didn't. But nevertheless, still a very important aspect when we think about what do we say when we say don't trust, verify. I have what I say I have, and it's not a fake thing that I can actually prove it on the Bitcoin network. We could look up some sort of wallet explorer sort of thing and say, hey, I don't know who this person is, but they have this amount. I don't know who they are, their identity, but I can prove to you, I can verify on the Bitcoin network, even on my own sort of Bitcoin node software that I run in my house. I can verify that both I have what I have, and if I found what Ben's address was, or he shared it with me, I could verify what Ben has, what he has in his wallet too. So another aspect that I think is important. If we're going to talk about don't trust, verify, we have to talk about that aspect too.
Yeah, I think that's great. Again, Nick Szabo, in this Genesis book, he begins to try to figure out how could I create a digital form of money in which there is no centralized controller of the code. And he had this idea of BitGold, and he was going to create this club, the BitGold Club, that was going to somehow be in charge of the ledger, the system of accounts, and then they could talk with one another. And if somebody was trying to game the system, then the club would like jump in and could say like, "That's out of bounds. You can't do that." And he realized as he's talking this system through that that's no different than the central bank, right? So it's a centralized point of control, and therefore, and Szabo with the cypherpunks is reading Friedrich Hayek, and they're like, that's really bad. We can't do this. And I haven't gotten to the place in the book where Van Werdum talks through Satoshi's discovery of the Bitcoin of the Byzantine generals problem, and that's super technical, and I'm not even going to get into it because I'm not sure that I can explain it well. But the point that Bitcoin, what makes Bitcoin so radically unique is that there is no centralized party that controls how much Bitcoin goes out um, as it's being created anew, and there are still new Bitcoins that are being created. There's no centralized group that could shut down um, the Bitcoin that are coming out, and that invention is actually very unique. So I want to talk for a minute about other cryptocurrencies. We've talked on kind of offline that we need to eventually get around to talking about what are sometimes called altcoins or cryptocurrencies. Some Bitcoiners even call them shitcoins, and they call them shitcoins for a reason. Sorry, parents, if you're listening to this with your child, Pastor Ben just said a naughty word, and I apologize. I will not try to quote that word again. I hope Jared's daughter is not listening. Um, but there's a reason why Bitcoiners don't like other cryptocurrencies like Ethereum or like Polkadot or like you name it, any other cryptocurrency out there. So, Jared, what's the thinking uh, among Bitcoiners as to why these other cryptocurrencies are bad along this don't trust but verify kind of idea?
Right. We could go down a lot of different rabbit trails why they're bad or wrong, but sticking to don't trust, verify, it's that exactly what you just said, that they're are the opposite of Bitcoin. That there is always a foundation, a founder, that there is always someone or some organization that's behind this thing, whether it doesn't matter what coin it is. And what's the problem with that? Well, there's a few. Ones that come to mind first are they can make a change whenever they want to. And it doesn't matter what you think as a person who might hold that coin, right? Or that cryptocurrency, because they're the founder and they can make the code. And so they can change whether it's the issuance amount. So if you have 100 and they're all worth $100, great, but they're going to issue, randomly, oh, we're going to actually have 10,000 now. And suddenly your coins that you had are worth much less and you had no say in that sort of thing. Another thing, a lot of these projects are funded with venture capital, and it's one of those secret in the dark room. Us normal people don't have access to stuff like that, but these venture capitalists do. And so people who found these new coins, they need money to do their projects, right? Everything needs money to go. And so they go and get funding for these things. Hey, I'll sell you this at a really, cheap price, pre mining, what we might call it. But before anyone else can buy it. And if you give me that much money, then when it finally launches, then you can sell it to all these regular normal people. And then they're the ones who are stuck. The phrase is holding the bag, but they're basically stuck with all these things that now suddenly are worth a lot less money because these people who made a bunch of money, made a couple $1 million, okay, now they're done with that and on to the next thing. Those are the top two that come to my mind, Ben. Where else would you go?
Yeah, I mean, I experienced this with Litecoin, right? The Litecoin was this project, and I think maybe I even talked about this on a previous episode. But Charlie Lee, the founder of Litecoin, he had this idea that he was going to base Litecoin very much on the Bitcoin protocol, but it would be every Litecoin would be in his idea worth a fourth of a Bitcoin. So he created this system in which instead of 21 million total Bitcoins, there would be 84 million Litecoins. The problem was that as a founder, he had mined the Genesis block and this huge amount of coins, and he was still actively trading them. And in 2017, right at the height of the market, when Bitcoin was hitting 20,000 for the first time after it had been just hundreds of dollars just a year before, Charlie Lee posts on Twitter at the time. I'm I'm going to, as the founder of Litecoin, I'm selling all of my Litecoin because I want to be out of the centralized role. Well, the problem was he had so many Litecoins that he tanked the market, and all of my Litecoin investment went, uh, and it's essentially never recovered. It was worth, I think, like $1,500 a coin or something at one point, um, and now it's $15. So it's like my baseball card collection. Um, it's not worth much of anything, and that was because the problem was because there was a centralized issuer. Frankly, even Ethereum, a lot of people still they maybe made some money on Ethereum. A lot of people that I meet that got into cryptocurrency after 2016, 17 or so, they talk about buying some Ethereum. But the problem with Ethereum is that um, Vitalik Buterin, he came up with this idea that he was going to get Bitcoiners to trade him their Bitcoin, and he was going to create these these Ethereum. Uh, and that was the initial way to buy Ethereum, was you had to buy it with Bitcoin. Uh, but the problem is there's still no limit to how many Ethereum will ever be, and it is very much centralized um, as to how the whole process works. It's now based on staking rather than proof of work. So again, there are these centralized groups of people who, the more Ethereum you have, the more Ethereum you'll get, and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, the big problem with cryptocurrencies, other than Bitcoin, is no other cryptocurrency is as decentralized as Bitcoin is, including Caspa. And I'll just throw that out there if my Caspa friends are listening.
And I think
I'm picking a fight intentionally.
that's like the most direct messaging I think I've ever heard on this show.
Yeah.
But I think another good, if I'm listening to this, I would say, well, hey, doesn't Bitcoin like have some sort of code changes sometimes too? So like, how does that work? Like it's not the same as it was right when it first came, but I thought you said it was decentralized. And I think this is a good sort of helpful. How does this work too? So in the Bitcoin world, right, it is open source, which just means that anyone can see the code. Anyone can they can make their own Bitcoin, right, if they want, copy it and paste it, and produce their own. But when we think about changing the software, there are, at least as I understand it, this is a don't trust me, go look it up somewhere else too. But there are a set of developers, right, that are not. There's no Bitcoin Foundation, right? So they're not getting paid by some company. There's no Bitcoin CEO that they work for. They work for the network and are solely funded, at least as I understand it, they're solely funded by donations and various nonprofit sort of things that have said, hey, we're going to take our profits and give some to they call them core developers. So one of the Bitcoin ETFs, the Bitwise ETF, that 10% of, I think 10% of their profits all go towards a fund to fund Bitcoin core development. And so let's say that I had a proposal that, I don't know, choose something silly. I wanted to double the supply cap of Bitcoin to 42 million. And if I wanted to get that done, I could support I think they're called BIPs, right? Bitcoin, is it Bitcoin Improvement? I don't actually know what it stands for, but some
Bitcoin Improvement
Right,
Protocol.
good. So
Yeah,
you
I'm pretty
submit a
sure.
BIP and then there's a number to it. And then the community talks about it. These people who are into programming and know a lot more about that discuss it. You'll hear people in the Bitcoin world debating about if we should do this. Really popular one was block size wars, right? That we should increase the size of the Bitcoin block. That was a change someone wanted to make. So the community itself talks about it, debates about it, and then eventually, and I'll throw it back to you too. Correct me if I'm wrong here. How this works is it's the developers, the core developers write the code, and then they send it out to the nodes, and then the miners also have to take part in that some way that I'm spacing on currently. But it's like hey, and you don't even have to download it either, because all of Bitcoin is backwards compatible. So you could use Bitcoin Core 10 still today, and you would still be able to spend and use your Bitcoin, all because it's not centralized, all because there's a group of people that are, again, not controlled by one person, but in a sense
Yep.
work for the network itself, and the people that use it. So I'll throw it back to you, Ben, if I miss anything, or correct me too if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think just I really did enjoy the book Block Size Wars, and what I took from that, and maybe from some other things I've listened to, maybe this is from Jan Pritzker's book, this idea that there are some Bitcoin improvement protocols that really be a significant substantive change to how Bitcoin works. So, for example, if you wanted to say, I don't think there should be 21 million total Bitcoin, there should be 42 million Bitcoin. That would be um, not a friendly proposal. So you kind of think of this like um, in Robert's Rules of Order. when people are making amendments, right? That's all that this is really is, right? Is saying like, I want to amend the motion. So there are what are called friendly amendments. So can we just specify this one little thing, and everybody says, or the person that's kind of leading the meeting says, is everybody cool with that? In the Bitcoin world, how that works is um, there's a lot of debate, open debate that goes on. And if it seems like everybody is good with it, then they put it forward, and then miners still have to ratify it by deciding to run that protocol. But there are some things that would be so big, like changing the issuance of Bitcoin, that they would call that a hard, that would take what's called a hard fork. So it's not a friendly amendment, it's an adversarial amendment. And people say that would fundamentally change my understanding of Bitcoin. In that case, then, if enough people say, we're not doing that, then, and this is across the whole network, then somebody can still say, I'm going to take the Bitcoin, everything looking back, and I'm going to fork it, and I'm going to try it again, but kind of on a new path. And there were some people that did that, right? The whole Bitcoin Cash thing was an attempt to fork the Bitcoin protocol and to make larger blocks and all this kind of stuff. And Roger Ver and Craig Wright and all the people that were involved in that, I think history has shown that they were scammers, and that they were, it was not, would not be good for the protocol, and the market has not validated that that was a wise move. At least their project essentially lost tons of value and is not nearly worth today what it was worth. I got a couple of Bitcoin Cash back in the day when the fork happened, because they actually were forking the Bitcoin protocol, and so anybody that had Bitcoin also got Bitcoin Cash. Um, so yeah, that's an example of kind of the difference, um, of how what in the Bitcoin world would be called consensus is achieved.
Right. And I think try and circle back like the idea of the difference too. Like what makes Bitcoin unique is that it is totally decentralized, right? That there is jokes and memes, right? When the price goes down, people post them. Somebody called a Bitcoin CEO, right? We need to do something. Well, there is no
Right.
CEO to call, right? And that's kind of the the don't trust too, is about, hey, and we've talked about this. I custody my own funds, right? Self custody. I self custody my own Bitcoin, and I'm not trusting anyone else. And so don't trust also means there's no one to go to if I need help, right? Like I can't call someone and say, "Oh, I didn't mean to send that. Please send it back." It's gone.
Right.
That there's no central person to look to too, and that is just so unique to all these other cryptocurrencies, all those other things. And maybe we should do a whole like why Bitcoin only episode to kind of dive into sort of the other sort of sacrifices, if you will, around other things. But at least with don't trust, verify, it's a, you don't have to trust some other founder, you don't have to trust some company, you don't have to trust something that is unseen and unknown. There's no hidden fees, no hidden taxes, no hidden service charges, if you want to use that kind of frame of mindset too. That what you see is what you get with Bitcoin, because it is completely decentralized, because you don't have to trust, or your trust minimized, and you can verify exactly what it is, how much is coming, what I have, and who I can send it to, all those sort of things.
I love it. We should definitely do an episode on that. Hey, I just want to throw out real quick, kind of a left field, but maybe a big left turn, but maybe a place to kind of wrap this up, is to talk about how the Reformation has dealt with this. So I've been reading this old book. I like to read old books. C.S. Lewis said, "Read old books." Government in the Missouri Synod by Carl Mundinger, written in 1947. Um, the subtitle of this book is fantastic. So in 1947, very much at the time that Hayek is writing his book, Mundinger writes his dissertation, and the subtitle is The Genesis of Decentralized Government in the Missouri Synod. So, hey, here's the thing. Lutherans have always been allergic to centralized power because Luther was convinced that a person can be Christian even if the Pope says you're not a Christian. It's not about a centralized authority that can give you access to God. Um, the way that you have access to God is by believing in Jesus Christ. And Christ alone rules his church. So Carl Mundinger was talking about how good it is that the Missouri Synod is decentralized. Well, to get a little political, I was on a podcast recently with Tim Allman and Scott Seidler in early September. I don't know. I think it actually just came out today, September 10th. And I'm encouraging us, without throwing anybody under the bus or even pointing out problems with any one person holding office. I am very much encouraging people in the Missouri Synod to go back to a decentralized form of church government, because it's really good when we have power to the small communities, power to congregations, power to local communities to make all their decisions. I don't want a centralized power making decisions, frankly, about anything. And that's going to get me into trouble, and I'm fine with that. It's worth fighting for decentralized. And why? Because humans are sinful and human institutions are sinful. And so we should not give them ultimate power or authority to do anything like tell us who we can have as our pastors, or what we can say and what we cannot say on a podcast or whatever else, who we can have on our boards. So decentralized forms of government are really good. I think they're healthy. I think they're good for the little guy. And I'm a little guy, and I'm all about that.
And
That's my political speech.
I love it. And I think you can even say that Jesus was pretty decentralized, wasn't he? I mean, sure, you could argue that he was the centralized person. Okay. But when you think about his, the way in which he accomplishes his mission, I'm reading the book Hero Maker right now, talking sort of about multiplication and just the idea that I'm not the hero. I need to make other people the hero, because when that happens, think about the impact of them then making other people heroes too. And it talked about, in a way that I have not really processed, that how crazy to the disciples it must have sounded when Jesus said, "You will be my witnesses from Judea to Samaria to the ends of the earth." And I'm sure their jaws were on the floor. Like, who? You mean me, Matthew, tax collector, to the ends of the earth? You mean me, simple fisherman, to the ends of the earth? What? And the only way that happens is by a decentralization, right? It's that each of those people goes with the gospel into the communities that they are in, and they do that gospel thing. They share the news of Jesus, who then other people hear it, and then they share the news of Jesus. And it's this multiplication effect that, frankly, would be hampered by decentralization. And maybe that's going to get me in trouble. I don't know. But even Jesus isn't like a, hey, yes, he says, Peter, you're my rock, I'll build my church on you. But I would go so far as to say I don't think he's envisioning a step ladder of authority, right? And so again, this will air after I'm through this process, but I'm in the middle of a call, right? So another congregation, God works through congregations, right, has called me to be their pastor and says, we think God wants you to come serve here. And that's kind of weird in our day and age to think that. I would kind of wish David was here. We had a good little back and forth about how we maybe elevate that a little bit too high in today's day and age, which I would agree with. But nevertheless, at least the way in which we function now, the congregation has the right to, as Walther says, to choose their own pastor, right? That it's not someone else saying, you must accept this individual as your pastor. You must now say goodbye to them because I am telling you that they are no longer good to be there and I need to take them somewhere else. That even that as LCMS Christians, like we are decentralized in what we believe about a congregation's ability to have a pastor, to choose a pastor, to select one too. And uh, I'm with you, Ben. I think we need more and not less of that stuff.
Yeah, even the the whole certification of pastors, which I was a part of as a faculty member at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis, took that responsibility very seriously. But I've been thinking a lot more about the whole certification issue of pastors, and I think we have essentially centralized it. We've put it in the hands of a very small group of people, and I think we would be much better served if congregation and district president were the ones to essentially be the certifying body. And why? Because we have such a large church body. It worked very well when there was a small number of Christians and everybody trusted everybody, but that's not the story of the Missouri Synod in the 21st century. And so when there is a high amount of controversy, I think it's better then to disperse power back to local communities, and let the local community be the place where stability happens, where I'm totally invested in my local congregation, right? I trust the people. We don't have fights. Even if we have big political differences, we love each other and we go to church together, because I see them week in, week out. Um, I just can't know everybody in our church body. So, hey, this has been a fun episode. We probably should wrap it up, especially before I get myself into too much political hot water with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. But the point is, power is no good when it's in the hands of a centralized group of just a few people, and especially when it comes to money. We're grateful that Jesus has brought us into His people, and He is this sole authority of His church, and yet He never uses that authority or power to rule in a wicked way, and so He's very unique in that way, the most benevolent leader that there has ever been. That He would die naked, alone, without a single person rooting for Him, gave up everything. That's the kind of leader that I would follow. All else are don't trust, verify. Good episode. Thanks, Jared.
See you in the next one.
All right, sounds good. We'll go check on David and make sure that he's still kicking.